Hey, welcome back, friends and family and strangers. We're so glad that you listened to the Saints podcast. We know you love us, and we love you too.
This is true.
Want to let you know that we're online. We're on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We have a website that is poppin', tothesaints.com. Mass people are coming in daily hits. The hit meter's running like a fan. We just want you to keep checking that out.
I don't know what website he's talking about.
I know.
Are you sure you're talking
It's
about
an
it?
awesome website.
It's
man.
the one with all 75.
I think he's believing it into being.
There you go. Yes.
Oh.
Naming it and claiming it.
Yes.
That's right.
Way to go.
No, we are glad that you listen to us multiple times every week, and that you're back again.
There are people who do that.
Yeah.
Been told.
We've actually been told about it. There's a family who, whenever they go on road trips and they drive, this is what they listen to, and all the kids get to listen to it.
Oh,
and
bless the kids' hearts.
we pray for them, but it's very it's encouraging in a way.
It is.
All right. Well, this is Andrew.
This is Carrie.
This is Allison.
This is Tyrone.
This is RC.
This is Bridget.
And this is Thomas.
Yeah, stay on your toes.
Sure enough. We started with a different person. It threw us all off.
And today we're going to be talking about a topic that we've kind of, amongst each of us have bounced around a little bit. And then we hear different comments from some of our listeners. And we just want to clarify a few things about the podcast. And so we're going to tackle, do people think that To the Saints podcast is a church meeting?
Man.
Ugh.
We're sort of kind of semi-answering a question.
Yeah,
Sort of,
yeah, I
kind
would
of.
say
I mean, it wouldn't necessarily pose as a question, but we've had some comments.
We've had some interesting comments that
Yes.
lead people to think
Yeah.
they might get a different impression.
So today, Saints, we had our 100th episode, which was the bonus features, which was fun and goofy, but we're going to kind of give you some more nitty-gritty behind the scenes of really what we're going to reframe To the Saints.
Wow.
So,
That's nice.
what'd you say, Allison?
That's super deep.
Oh, super.
Yes.
Mind blown.
Dream within a dream.
Oh, man. Inception right here.
Inception.
So, Saints, we are 7 saints who come together to express the life of Christ. The To the Saints podcast. So since we are that, right, guys? Since we're that, the To the Saints podcast must be a church meeting, right? Because there's 7 of us. Where 2 or more are gathered. Isn't that what that says? I mean, that's what I just said. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, then there I will be in their midst. If I'd read all my notes, I would know what I'm saying. Am I right?
No, that's not true, RC.
Nope. Lord mercy.
Even if you read your notes, it's not true.
Just because they're on there doesn't make it true.
There are many ways.
But it's on the internet.
Right.
Still not true, RC.
Fair enough.
That Wikipedia, not true.
You keep trying.
There are many different ways of meeting together around the Lord. A corporate meeting where the saints gather under the headship of Christ to express his life back to him and to each other is not the same thing as a couple of people in a coffee shop or a group having a game night or 7 talented folks creating a podcast.
I wonder who they are.
Even if the content of each gathering is centered around the Lord being all in all.
Yes.
For To the Saints podcast, one of our statements is on the website. Let us press on to maturity. We want to be an encouragement to our brothers and sisters in Christ, to help open their eyes, to encourage them to go further in the Lord, to explore the depths of Christ together. But it's not a meeting.
It's not a meeting.
No.
Yeah. So, what are some similarities and differences between the To the Saints podcast and a meeting? I'm glad you asked, Allison, Carrie, Thomas, Andrew, Bridget, and RC.
Well, you're welcome.
Dying to know.
Yes.
We'll start with the similarities. One similarity is the meeting and podcast are both led by the Spirit.
Yes.
We individually and collectively or corporately seek the Lord for what he wants and his desires for our podcast, our topics and discussions, as is the same with corporate meetings. If you're a part of a church, there may be seasons where you guys are seeking the Lord in regards to Jesus as the door or the shepherd or whatever it may be. And we seek the Lord for what he wants to share with one another to build up the body in that respect. And so that's one similarity.
Yes.
Yeah, another similarity is all the saints functioning. You'll hear in the podcast brothers and sisters sharing. Certain times, maybe a couple of us will share a little bit more than others, but there's an equal amount of sharing back and forth. There's not one person just speaking all the time and the other people agreeing, which may not be as interesting as a podcast, but but no, the similarities, all of us are functioning, have equal say and contribution.
Right, I was going to say, and have equal say, that the sister's voice is weighted just as much as the brother's voice is, and that is true not only in this podcast, but also in a functioning under the headship of Christ meeting.
Another similarity is that we prepare for these podcasts, and typically in church meetings, there will have been some preparation of the saints beforehand.
You got to prepare for that?
Right, so that they
Like
come.
on Sunday morning, right?
Or school.
Like that.
But there's preparation for both
Yes.
to share the Lord.
Another similarity is that you're going to see is a revealing of Christ.
Yes and amen.
You've seen that on our show, and in a body that's functioning under the headship and by the life of Christ, you will see Christ being revealed. So those are what our podcast I'm done. My brain is not functioning. Keep going. I have to keep going.
Those are the similarities between our podcast and a...
Yes.
And I'm sure there's others,
Yeah.
but
They're just offhand.
those are,
those-
Those are the big ones.
yeah, exactly.
And we're talking about a church meeting, not necessarily church life.
Which is different.
Yeah, we'll get to that
Right.
here in a little bit too, I'm sure.
Right.
So now we're going to head into the differences.
Yeah, what are some differences, Carrie?
Hey, thanks for asking, Tyrone.
With our podcast, you have seen a polished work.
Well,
You may not more so than a meeting.
Professional.
We
Hand
say
polished.
polished.
We say polished, but it is polished for air. I mean, we take out a lot of our, like my brain just not functioning, saying that kind of thing.
Oh, you want me to take that out?
Yes, please do so. I want you to take that out. But unless now it actually applies. Anyways, it is more polished. Things are edited. We've worked through a lot of what we're going to say before we actually say it,
right.
Yeah.
which does not happen in a meeting. You get what you get when you come to a meeting. Also in a meeting, there are, like on a podcast, we kind of keep it flowing. But in a meeting, there are a lot of pauses and process of people are processing things, going on to the next thing, listening to the Lord. Where is he leading now? And that kind of thing, which I think a lot of people will be surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some meetings that are, on it where you're, one person stands up, the next one and the next one, but a lot of them, you're just sitting there waiting on the Lord for the next thing. And
Especially when the church is smaller.
Yeah.
yes.
And there's fewer saints to function.
right. And so that might be a surprise to some people.
Well, and also, like you said, we present a polished work. Even in our recordings, there are pauses and times where either we're looking over the notes or we're really thinking about what somebody just said. Do we really want to go with the next place? And so we ourselves have pauses that get cut out.
They get cut out.
They don't make the final cut.
No. Right.
I mean, I could have put that in the bonus features, but then you would have just had an hour's worth of dead air. But,
We're beholden to the Lord.
yes.
And now,
Another thing that happens, or I guess I don't know how to. We've learned to lay down our lives for each other in other expressions and things like that. I'm not sure how to go with this. I had it the other day, but it's gone now. You don't see our disagreements. A lot of that is worked out ahead of time. Not that we argue with each other, but
I disagree.
whenever we do put something on there and a saint's like, I really don't know what you mean when you say that. Can you please explain that?
Right.
Or those kinds of things all get worked out ahead of time. Well, that in a meeting it gets worked out in real time.
Right.
Right.
Somebody stands up and says something, and you're kind of like, huh. I don't really understand what they're saying. You may just let it go at that point, or you may address it at that time.
Right.
Can you please explain some more? What did you mean when you said that? You don't get a lot of that. And so,
Yeah, that doesn't end up in the end product that we put out there for the world.
no.
You know, we had somebody reach out about something, and he shared with us something that he was sharing with other people. He kind of wanted to run it past us, make sure we were okay with what he was saying about us, which I would totally appreciate that. That was considering others. That was definitely of the Lord, I think. And he said something about, I don't necessarily agree with everything they say. Well, in a church meeting, if you don't necessarily agree with everything they say, you have opportunity to talk that out. And even not in the meeting, but you can go one-on-one after the meeting or during the week. You can go visit with that saint and say, hey, I didn't understand what you said here. What's this? And here at the podcast, like Carrie just said, we've already worked out most of the kinks, at least content-wise, between us in our preparation meetings. You know, Bridget talked about our preparation meetings leading up to our recording day. We've already worked some of those kinks out, and so we don't necessarily work that out on the air for you. And so you actually get a nice shiny version as opposed to the real. You get the glory, not the gore, when church meetings are full of both glory and gore. And she talked about learning to lay our lives down for one another. We have been built together.
Yes.
The Walters, Thomas, and the Babians have known each other since 2010? 2011?
11. At least for me, it was 11.
Yeah, you guys moved in 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
Late
we've
2010,
known
early
Thomas
2011.
since 2010, and you guys came just a couple months later in 2011.
That's almost 10 years.
I know,
Yes.
right?
I mean, there's a lot of, I guess that was my point.
Yeah.
And when groups are starting out, they don't have that yet. They haven't built into that yet. And so there's a lot that even in our preparation or disagreements, we've learned to just lay down a lot of stuff and not argue over things because we want the Lord's mind. And so we'll just, okay, maybe we ask just for clarification, but that's only to get onto one page.
Right.
More so when we speak.
And at this point in the game, we've been built together with the Hardys in close proximity, living, in community together for the last 2.5 years.
Yes.
But we've known them and have been in community with them in a not as intense way, but for 2 or 3 years beyond that.
Yes.
When did you guys?
I met you guys at
2014.
yeah, I was gonna say at the Interconnect
right, so yeah, 5
2014.
years.
Right.
So
And
there.
Carrie and Andrew, too, and Thomas. Yeah.
Yeah. All of us have
So I don't know
known
you
each
guys
other.
that well.
No. Sorry, RC.
So there is some history amongst this group of saints here that's been built together over years.
Yeah.
Some of us almost a decade, and so that says something there.
Yeah, and a lot of our stuff has been worked out in body life.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we come into this and function together. There's just a little bit of rub, but not anything like it was when we first entered into the original expressions we were in.
Right.
We know how to function in the Lord's life together, and you just kind of pick up like you're riding a bike.
Right. I mean, most of us have a sense of humor, and so maybe all of us. I don't
Well,
know.
I mean, I did want
Sorry,
to point out that the
sorry.
laughter is not canned laughter.
No,
Legitimate.
that
It's
is genuine.
Yes. And so as we've gotten to know each other outside of the podcast, we know what makes each other laugh, what makes each other mad, what buttons to press and not press, and that can come out in our podcast. We can tease Thomas because he teases back, and he's easy to tease, and Tyrone's the same way, but they'll dish it right back before you know it, and oh my gosh. But we've learned that not in the podcast itself.
No,
We've learned that.
the podcast is the fruit of.
Yes, the
learning
podcast is the fruit of our body life together, which should be another similarity to a church meeting. The church meeting should be the fruit of the body life that's gone on throughout the week.
Right.
Yes.
Well, that was a long thing. Another difference between our podcast and church meeting is that in church meetings, there's usually not a whole lot of reframing of things. Like we have a lot of episodes, several episodes where we reframe XYZ.
Yeah.
A couple weeks ago was Born Again.
Yep.
We're reframing the To the Saints this week. But that's not what meetings necessarily are for.
A lot of the reframing, the ways that, we kind of, our minds are renewed and we can have a new way of thinking about something actually takes place outside of those meetings,
Yeah.
those main corporate meetings.
Yeah. It normally happens in body life, yeah, like RC was saying.
Right. And so, kind of to jump down to my point down here, even though we share time together in preparation of the podcast and we have shared experiences together in making the podcast, it comes out of it as basically as it was just said, that we have shared life together in community, not just making this podcast.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Didn't we do reframing meetings?
We did.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes, we
Yeah, I
did.
think we did.
Yeah.
So, like, the reality of life together is significantly more valuable than the reality of preparing a podcast together.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And
Yes.
so what the saints are experiencing in body life, if they're looking at the podcast and going, why doesn't this look like that? My point is that what you're experiencing is actually more valuable than what you're seeing on or what you're hearing on a podcast. And don't, like, it's comparing apples to oranges, you know, like don't compare in that sense. And in the sense that I mean is, like, we've had a comment from someone who said that this is like a taste of a meeting. And yes, we're expressing Christ, and in meetings Christ is being expressed. But if your goal is for a meeting to be like this podcast, that's completely the wrong goal for a meeting. And then we've had someone who said, you know, I thought when I got around you guys, what the experience would be like what I hear on your podcast.
Yes.
And
We're not that spiritual.
the reality is that when we are just spending time together, saints, it's not like what you hear on this podcast.
No. There are some things that are the same, but a lot of it is not.
Yeah, of course
The
the Lord
laughter's
comes
there,
up
joking,
and
the Lord comes up, all that's
joking and
there.
laughter. But this podcast has a very specific purpose.
Yeah.
And so that all to say, the final difference that we're going to talk about is preparation. And I know that I specifically said that preparation is a similarity, that we do prepare for the podcast, and as a church, you're preparing before you come together. But the difference is that for this podcast, we are all 7 preparing together. Now, we might partner up and start the notes, but all 7 of us are involved in the preparation and the decision making. Whereas when you're preparing as a church, you're typically either you're preparing yourself with the Lord, or you're getting together with 1 or 2 other saints and preparing. And so when you come together, there has been preparation, but it hasn't all been worked out either. Right? Like we were talking about.
Right.
And so the preparation you bring still is being worked out among the saints in the church, whether it's right there in the meeting or whether you go and talk to that brother or sister afterwards and you're like, listen, when you said this is what it sounded like to me, or this is what I thought you meant. Is that right?
Yeah.
Or you just go to them and say, can you just explain a little bit more what you meant when you said this? Because we genuinely want to understand each other.
Right.
And know that, and we know that we're all for the Lord. Right. So, so my point is there's also a difference in our preparation, because we're all preparing together and deciding on what we bring. And then we bring this one podcast to you. But it's at least not like the meetings we experience.
Now, it can be similar to a particular kind of meeting.
Yeah.
Like there is such a thing as a planning meeting where the church together plans what are we going to look at the next few weeks. But then outside of that, the preparation is done individually or in groups, not necessarily as the whole.
Right.
Whereas this is typically as the whole
Every single time.
Right.
every time. Yeah, so whew.
And if we record something, this hasn't ever happened yet to my knowledge, but if we record something that we don't like, we can just delete it. But
There's been a few things we've taken out.
The first one
yeah.
was kind of like that.
Yeah. I didn't think of the first one.
God deleted the first one.
Yes, he did.
He's got the big button.
But obviously, meetings, you don't have that luxury. So you kind of have to deal with the fallout in a
do.
different way.
But that's how you're built together.
Exactly.
So it's good.
Exactly.
Right, because then you learn to give and take and show grace and receive grace.
You learn Christ.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the fun things on the podcast that I enjoy is when we make the notes. There could be someone else who actually typed up those notes, and a different
Yeah.
person actually speaks it,
Right.
Yes.
highlights it, and says
Yeah.
it, and so that's always fun.
That was an interesting, unique thing. That you don't do that in a meeting.
Yeah, usually in the
You don't-
meeting
you don't
have,
speak other
maybe
people's
you have your
things.
notes,
Right.
or you have what the kind of Lord's told you, and
Right.
and you kind of weigh it with the Lord whether it's the time to share it in that meeting or a different one. But you're not like, hey Thomas, here.
Yeah. Can,
Right. It's not
can
like,
you say
"Here,
my thing for
yeah,
me?
use my notes. Here's my notes. You speak
for
Go
me.
ahead. It'd be kind of cool if people did that. I think. But they don't. But like say this particular one, we have our notes in front of us. Who put these notes down? Carrie, Tyrone,
Wasn't me. I just put the top part.
Andrew.
Yeah, I put some. And
It was Andrew. So
Some-
Andrew put a lot of
I
notes
also
down.
put some. Everyone put a little bit here and
Yeah.
there.
And so if you like what we say, it's our writers.
Yeah.
You're back from strike.
A virtual assistant.
VA, yes.
Our ghostwriters. So Saints, when the podcast came about, let me just give you kind of some history, because some of you have really been on and from the beginning, and you are super fans, and then there's been those who are just hopping on to this thing that everybody else is telling them about, and so spiritually speaking, here at To the Saints, we are followers of the way who have been enraptured by our Lord and his ageless purpose, his ultimate intention. We are believers in Jesus Christ who have come to love the cross and its foolishness because we've had a foretaste of the resurrection that follows. And yes, there is a question from a listener that we answer about what do you mean when you say the cross and its foolishness. So you can go check that episode out. Practically speaking, we are 3 families and a single brother who have all spent time in vocational ministry but are now following the Lord outside the institutional system. We have all experienced organic, natural, real church life and are now moving wherever the Lord leads to plant expressions of Christ in cities all over the U.S. We've been in Austin, and now we're moving on from Austin. To the Saints started out as a 2-hour radio program on Sunday afternoons here in Austin. Now we're just online sharing what we've seen and experienced on a weekly-ish podcast. But that's from the website there too. But yeah, when we got started, it was born out of a specific thing. And then it kind of got tweaked a little bit and evolved. And now right now it is what it is. We're preparing for a season when that's going to change again. You know, we're looking at video stuff and even courses that we're trying to put together. So, I mean, like, there's some seasonal things that go on. And even the church has seasons, and church meetings can have seasons, but that's not still the same as a church meeting.
No, it is not. I guess my thing was just to make sure, don't put what we do on here onto your group.
Yes.
That was my heart.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because that may not be the Lord, and don't try to get them to function like you hear us on the podcast. Let the Lord move you and do you. You know, you can hear Christ from us, and you can learn Christ from us, and things like that. Take all of that you want, but don't try to copy. Don't try to put it onto somebody else and say this is what it should be like.
Yes.
And don't hear, you do you. That's not what we're saying either.
Yeah, we're
Oh
not-
yeah, no.
We're saying you do the Lord's life.
Do the Lord's life.
Follow the
Spirit, follow the Lord.
Yeah, follow his life.
That's a really good point. I hear that often, that
Yep.
phrase, and that's like a 1% off of where the
Right.
truth is.
Just
And
ever
it's
so
like,
slightly.
I don't know about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think Tyrone has a word for us.
Yeah. What's the word there, Tyrone?
Oh. be faithful to the Lord.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I see this like the reframing just is like pulling up the veil. Like we're just normal people, and we're not like high end super spiritual all the time. There's a cool funny show I like called Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, and it's hilarious. But one of my favorite parts is the fact that all the shots they have of them just driving through the same dirty streets as everyone else, having to deal with traffic and sometimes police pulling them over, just the same problems that everyone else has. It's, you know, these super famous people, you know, and right now the NBA finals are going on, which maybe will be concluded by the time this airs, but you have these incredible stars that we watch them for 60 minutes.
Yep.
But to get to that 60 minutes, it requires
Yes.
thousands of hours of practice and
Yep.
teamwork and stuff.
Yep.
And
Yep.
the camaraderie on this podcast, it's, highly intense, focused, in terms of like speaking about the Lord, but also it's born out of
Yes.
thousands of hours of time together,
Yes.
and
That's good.
that's just
That's really
how
good.
it goes. And I know some people, well, all people, including myself, we would want this really quickly,
Right.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But it doesn't happen quickly. It
No.
happens.
Over time.
It takes a long time. It's like a
Yeah.
good, it's like two people who've been married for 40 years who really deeply know each other. It takes time,
Yeah. Yep.
So
And
That's
we
really
didn't
good.
start this when we first met. We started this 7 years after we first
Yeah.
met.
Yeah, it would have been a different podcast.
It would have been.
Even when RC first mentioned it was like, what?
Right. Right.
So, we do want to encourage you, if you're listening to the podcast and you're not part of a group, this is an oasis. It's a time, sweet time sharing the Lord. And, but the reality is it's not a meeting. And if you're in a group, maybe you get some ideas based on some of the things we've talked about. We know some groups who listen to the podcast and then they discuss some things of the Lord from the podcast, but the podcast doesn't substitute the meeting.
Right.
Right.
No.
So, if you are one of those people who aren't part of a group, you can always go to our website and sign up. Let us know where you're at, and we can see if there's anyone that we know in your area. If you are already a group, we still encourage you to listen to the podcast, of course. But we just want to reframe the To the Saints podcast and the reality of it. So not to puff us up in any way, but to let you know, kind of behind the scenes, behind the veil, our blood, sweat, and tears that we do prepare for you, and give it all we got.
wow.
Do you want to say that last thing you have on there?
Sure. I'll say is that I think I'm sure some listeners, because they really want heaven on earth, they would love for this to look like a meeting, because in some way, even maybe in their subconscious thinking, okay, it's possible.
Sure.
It's possible to have a super amazing meeting, a super amazing community, because it's like psychologically comfortable, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
But the reality is that nothing is perfect this side of heaven.
No.
Right.
So, our culture is bathing in artificiality,
Yeah.
and listeners, we don't want to even inadvertently give a false presentation of
Right.
what life,
Yeah.
on the daily is for us, and so,
Yep.
just be aware of that.
That's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really, really good. Well, all right. To the Saints, reframed for you. You
There
want
you
to
have
close
it.
us out, Andrew, since you opened us up?
Yeah, definitely.
Wonderful.
You want to, don't you, Andy?
That was more what that was like.
I can't wait. We just want to thank you for listening.
Yep.
And
Yes, we
we're
do.
always encouraged by your comments and
Yes.
floored that people keep listening, and we're really excited about that. But it helps to know when you comment and share this on Facebook, share the Instagram stories. All those are really encouraging. You don't even know how excited
Yeah.
we get. We're like, look,
Sure.
someone listened, someone shared it. This is great. So thank you for listening. Go to tothesaints.com. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. This has been Andrew.
This is Carrie.
This is Allison.
This is Tyrone.
This has been RC.
This is Bridget.
And this is Thomas.
Oh my goodness, turn the AC on.
I
Paul.
know.